It was on some of the stereotypical places. It was in inner city African-American Latino areas. It was in rural Latino and African-American areas like the Texas-Mexico border. It was also in fully white areas such as Appalachia, and certainly, in this neck of the woods, Native American reservations are among the most food insecure places in America. And they found third world style malnutrition. Richard Nixon, when he was running for president, basically denied hunger was a problem. Within a year, Richard Nixon held the first, and to this date only, White House conference on hunger. And it wasn't just political window dressing. It had very significant results. Out of that, created by executive order, the forerunner to the Women's, Infants, and Children program. He laid the groundwork for a bipartisan coalition of Senator Robert Dole, you may know, conservative Republican from Kansas, and Senator George McGovern, liberal senator from South Dakota, to, after that conference, create the Modern Nutrition Assistance Safety Net. I told you food stamps used to be a relatively small program where you had to put some money down. That created the food stamps program as the major program it is today. After that, school breakfast was expanded, summer meals were expanded. Why did Nixon change from denying this was a problem to doing something about it? Number one, he actually grew up in poverty. And he understood this, no matter his rest of the faults. And I had a long debate with a friend of mine that he said my chapter on Richard Nixon was too nice. So I said, he said, I think my chapter's called, Thief, Crook, Danger to Democracy, and When a History's Better, Hunger Fighters. And so A, he understood this, but B, he was forced to do it because the society demanded we do something about it. Those doctors produced a report that got media coverage. Big media coverage. In my book, I have a whole chapter on media coverage. In the late 1960s, there were a few dozen network news stories on hunger each year. 2 won Emmys. Most years, since then, 0. And the assumption of the media coverage was we have this problem because government's not doing its job, and primarily to fix it, government's got to do something about it. Today, when they do, it's basically, some celebrity came and volunteered for an hour and we're solving the problem. Honestly, that's a major difference in our society and culture. And that media forced the political system to respond. Senator McGovern talks about how he woke up the morning after this, was haunted by seeing this, and really insisted that they do something serious about this. In addition, it was grassroots community organizing. We are often taught that Dr. King's Poor People's Movement failed after he was assassinated. That he got a lot done on civil rights, but he utterly failed when it came to poverty. So let's not even talk about that. So when we talk about him on his birthday, it's all about kumbaya feelings, and we solved that whole problem, not the rest of his message. Well, the truth is, my research found the single greatest demand of the Poor People's Movement of Dr. King was the creation of the modern Federal Nutrition Assistance Safety Net. And that helped push the creation of these programs. And what did they do? They worked. They dramatically expanded, and by the late 1970s, we almost entirely ended hunger in America. Let me repeat that. In the late 1970s, we almost entirely ended hunger in America. Raise your hand if you're with a food bank, a soup kitchen, or a food pantry, please. Keep your hands up if it existed before 1980. A few. Was it a soup kitchen or a mission?
Food bank. Food bank.
Food bank. When was it founded?
1960.
1960?
68.
Okay, 68. Very rare. Very rare. In America in 1978, there were a few hundred feeding programs, charitable feeding programs. Today there are over 60,000. In New York City in 1978, there were 28, now there are 1,200, feeding tens of millions of our neighbors. I started with one secular parable. Let me give you one more, that of the bucket brigades. We used to fight fires with bucket brigades, one bucket at a time, one bucket at a time, one bucket at a time. Someone would yell fire, and you'd run to the well and then pass it on and pass it on. That's if people weren't too sick from yellow fever or cholera. And believe it or not, I found in my research, sometimes the bucket brigades were understaffed because of yellow fever or cholera. True. If you didn't run out of water, if the well didn't go, there was still something in the water, if it wasn't frozen. And by the way, at 3 a.m. in February, not everyone showed up for the bucket brigades. But they defined America to the public's imagination. They were what made America different and great. They were the faith-based armies of compassion of their time. Good-hearted people showed up to do a job and help their neighbors. There's only one weensy, teensy, little problem with the bucket brigades. They didn't work. City after city burnt to a crisp. New York City in 1776 burnt down almost overnight. I don't know whether it was Mrs. O'Leary's cow that knocked down the lantern or something else, but Chicago was gone in a few days. You know, San Francisco and Seattle had big earthquakes, but it wasn't the earthquakes that destroyed the city, it was the fires. It was the fires. Now let me ask you one more quiz. Raise your hand, last quiz of the afternoon, my session. Raise your hand if during your lifetime a major American city in which you've lived is burnt down entirely. Why doesn't that happen anymore? Look around. There's fire alarms, fire safety codes required by government and enforced by government. We replaced volunteer fire departments in most urban areas and even maybe suburban areas with professional fire departments who were paid to be on call no matter what. I love firemen in New York. Many of them gave their lives. They're rushing in when I'm rushing out. I'm not quite sure what they're doing when they're not fighting fires. They're like posing for calendars or cooking or whatever they're doing. But aren't we glad that they are on call no matter what? They're going to be there. And we replaced buckets with professional fire pumps. One morning at 3 a.m., thinking about this, as I'm sure all of you do at 3 a.m., I woke up to research how many gallons of water a bucket could deliver a minute versus a fire truck. I calculated if we're lucky, the buckets could deliver 60 gallons of water a minute. Fire truck delivers 1,000 gallons of water a minute. I said I was going to have one last question. One truly last question. Your home's burning down. You're on the second floor. You're with your prized possessions, your pictures of your family, your cat, your conference agenda from here, your copy of my book, all your prized possessions. Which would you rather have? A professional fire department show up that's trained and equipped and has everything they need to do the job, or a volunteer bucket brigade that may or may not show up? Anyone? I've never had anyone pick number two. I've given a few hundred of these. Never had anyone pick number two. Why do I give you this analogy? Because when it comes to fighting hunger, when it comes to helping poor people, we sold the nation the bill of goods that we can solve a major social problem impacting 49 million people with modern bucket brigades. Instead of a guaranteed, systematized safety net that's there, instead of living wage jobs that people working hard and playing by the rules can earn their way to upward mobility the way my grandparents did when they came to this country, we tell people that a few groups showing up on Thanksgiving and Christmas are going to systematically solve a major social problem. You know, last time I was here, I visited Rocky Mountain National Park. I'm not sure that could have been preserved purely by volunteer groups. Many conservative people decry the safety net, having come to talks of mine on public universities where they came over public roads to do so. I just simply suggest we've got to look beyond other people's waste is something that doesn't personally benefit us. And that is just, you know, the reality. These are extraordinarily effective programs. Now, for those of you doing this work, I want to be clear. I honor that work. It is vital work. There are people you are feeding who would not get fed unless you were doing that work. Let me say there's someone far to the left of me, Jan Poppendike. She's a friend of mine. She wrote a book, Sweet Charity, and she actually argues that pantries and kitchens let people off the hook and actually make hunger worse because that lets government off the hook. And if they weren't there, poor people would sort of rise up and demand social justice. I don't believe that. I believe without the work many of you are doing, people would starve. You can't eat hope. You can't eat social change. A hungry person can't learn. A hungry person can't organize. And without pantries and kitchens and food banks, the country would never even see this problem, the non-poor part of this country. So I think this work is absolutely vital, but I also send the message it is not the long-term answer to the problem. And you know, some of you in these agencies, food drives drive us crazy, right? Even if you believe in direct food service, you'd have to say, buy the food, you know, give us money so we can buy it wholesale. I say to groups, if you found out that a lot of senior citizens in your neighborhood couldn't afford enough prescription drugs, would you hold a prescription drug drive? Would you say, go into your medicine cabinet, pick out medicine you don't think you need anymore, and then, you know, that's what we're doing with food people laugh when they go, that's what we're doing. If you're building a new church, synagogue, or mosque, and you're building a new building, do you tell all the parishioners to bring in whatever brick they think you need? Or do you raise money and hire professional contractors to do the job? We just don't think of poor people that way. We don't think of poor people's programs that way. My message is, let's think with a heart and a head. If you need a coordinated societal solution to build your interstate highway, you need a coordinated societal situation for systematic economic inequality that impacts 50 million Americans. I want to stress that I am a committed capitalist. I have more left-wing friends than I that get mad at me when I say this. But my grandparents came here and built a better life for me and their grandchildren because they had hope. And you could work hard and you could advance and get somewhere. New York City in the last year, and everywhere in the country, the FEMA Emergency Food and Shelter Program was cut by 40%. Funding to pantries and kitchens and food banks cut by 40%. 2 different bills slashed the food stamps program with these cuts, if we don't reverse them, going into effect in 2013. A massive decrease in food stamps benefits already passed. I'm not even talking what's proposed. New York City soup kitchens and food pantries are closing down. The number of people in poverty in the last year increased by 75,000 people. We have 38,000 people sleeping in homeless shelters in New York City. And that's poor people. The average person, median family income declined by 5%. 5%. Over the last 3 years. In the last year, the 57 billionaires in New York City had their net worth increased by $11 billion. $11 billion, from $200 billion to $211 billion. At the same time, our governor, and so you know I'm fair, a Democratic governor, pushed to eliminate a previous tax of 2% on the millionaires and billionaires. Had that tax been in effect, instead of having a net worth of $211 billion, they'd have a net worth of $209 billion. And I think somehow they muddle through. Now let me say something about food stamps too. Food stamps are a conservative program. You're going to say, yeah, I'm full of it, but hear me out just 1 second. In truly liberal countries, India or Brazil, you are sent to a government food warehouse to get government food. The food stamps program supports the private sector. It supports Walmart, it supports food towns, it supports neighborhood stores. Food stamps are a voucher program. Food stamps are a voucher program. They allow people to use their economic choice in the free market system to get food through the private sector, and they are incredibly efficient. Before the recession, the administrative overhead in the food stamps program was about 15%. Lower than many nonprofit groups, honestly, when you really honestly take the cost of the donation from somewhere else in the country to then to a national organization, to then the food bank or a food rescue group, to a pantry and kitchen, and they're cost at every step of the way. So honestly, if we say $1 gets us this much food, that's only talking about one step of the system. And so honestly, even before the recession, food stamps, on a pure economic standpoint, forget ideology entirely, pure economic standpoint, were far more effective and had less administrative overhead. Since the recession, administrative costs have been reduced to at least no more than 7%. Why? Because the caseload has skyrocketed, the vouchers that people get to buy food in the private sector have increased, and basically employees have either stayed flat or gone down. I suggest it's one of the most effective government programs ever run, and it dramatically reduced hunger and almost ended it in the 70s. If we help more people get it, we can dramatically reduce hunger now and make sure that someone isn't penalized because they work 5 more hours and all of a sudden they lose all benefits. You do realize that's the problem we have these cliffs.